With the 2021 NBA offseason coming to an end, the Los Angeles Lakers made nothing short of some interesting decisions. After failing to make the playoffs due to injury, many believe this team would be making some signings to get reliable, young, healthy players they could rely on. But this team did the complete opposite of this. Well, sort of. With the pressure to win pressuring this Lakers team as the months go on and LeBron gets older and older, they knew their championship window with the King was diminishing. So they went all in to win now this offseason despite their lack of star free agents. On paper, the signings the Lakers have made look amazing. They were able to get a former league MVP who made the triple-double a dull stat because he averaged one for an entire season, one of the most offensively gifted players and a top 10 scorer in NBA history, and a big man who was literally one of the most dominant players in the league at one point. All of this sounds great, and after listing the accolades of all these players, you might be thinking, the Lakers are destined to win the 2022 NBA Finals, right? Well, sometimes things aren't as they seem, because the three players I just mentioned in Russell Westbrook, Carmelo Anthony, and Dwight Howard are at ages 32, 37, and 35. With these new additions, the Lakers have formed a historic roster that we might not see again for a very long time, and this experiment they're gambling on could change the entire landscape of the NBA. With LeBron James and Anthony Davis suffering lingering injuries last year, the biggest issues of this Lakers roster were exposed. Sure, any team that loses their star will be worse, but when LeBron and AD went down for the Lake Show, they couldn't even stay afloat and instantly became one of the worst rosters in the league, which clearly made the LA front office rethink their plans heading into next year. Throughout LeBron James' career, we haven't really seen him sidelined with injury often, which was a key factor in his greatness. But after a fluke ankle injury, the Lakers got a wake-up call. That being, their championship window with LeBron could close sooner rather than later. This team was already able to win in 2020, but after key role players in the playoff run regressed, the Lakers knew they had to go all in during this offseason to get what they needed. And well, they may have done just that. Out of the 14-man roster with players that have a chance at minutes, the Lakers swapped out 9 of these guys for new additions, which is almost the entire roster aside from LeBron and AD. Some of these trades or signings were somewhat small, like 3 guys in Trevor Ariza, Kent Bazemore, and Wayne Ellington, but the rest of the moves that occurred were to fix the issues on this team, or just flat out get them better. Aside from the 3 players I just mentioned, LA was also able to bring in Russell Westbrook, Dwight Howard, Rajon Rondo, Carmelo Anthony, Kendrick Nunn, and Malik Monk. At first glance, you might be thinking, what makes this Lakers team unlike anything we've ever seen before? But let me show you guys the age of all their new additions now, because to say it's shocking is an understatement. Out of all the new additions that this team brought in, 7 out of the 9 players I mentioned are 32 or above. But what makes this interesting is the other 2 guys are very young at age 23 and 26. Seeing the Lakers adding all these veterans got me thinking, where does this team rank all time for oldest average age, and have other teams like this had success in the past? And all I have to say is after deep research, the results of this may shock you, and if the Lakers are able to win at the highest level this year, they might just be making history. Starting off with the Lakers team, there are 14 players on this roster that have a chance at minutes, and although the team will be running a 10 to 12 man lineup, I will include all 14 of these players in all the stats given because there will likely be injuries, and we don't really know who will be getting minutes just yet. With that being said, the Lakers 14-man roster consists of all these guys. Some familiar faces from last year like Bron, AD, Marc Gasol, Wes Matthews, and Horton Tucker, but other than that, it's all new guys. This team was able to add veteran talent with Westbrook, Melo, Howard, and young talent with Malik Monk and Kendrick Nunn. Where things get interesting is where you insert the ages of all these players in the 14-man roster, because as shown, this Lakers team is old. Well, if the Rajon Rondo signing goes through, this Lakers team has an average age of around 31.5 years old. With this roster alone, the 2021-22 Lakers are the 5th oldest team in the 2000s. Yes, out of every team that's been assembled since the year 2000, the Lakers are the 5th oldest. But this doesn't really tell the full story for this team. Remember when I said the Lakers were able to get some young talents? Well, when I said young, I mean pretty young, because LA was able to re-sign Talen Horton-Tucker, who is only 20 years old, and bring in Kendrick Nunn and Malik Monk, who like I mentioned are 23 and 26 years old. These guys will have a solid role for the Lakers team, but if this roster is healthy, they won't exactly be playing a major role, being that the Lakers have 2 of the most ball-dominant players in the league sharing the ball in the starting lineup. Not to mention, they also brought in guys like Melo and Rondo who need the ball in their hands to be at their best. Melo for scoring and Rondo for playmaking. With that being said, these 3 young players make up a minority of the LA roster, and if you take them out of the equation, it really does show this team's true age. Just look at Talen Horton-Tucker at age 20. If you take him out of the 14-man roster and then calculate the average age of this Lakers team, it comes out to be 32.5 years old, which would in fact be the oldest roster of the 2000s. Just in the case that Talen Horton-Tucker is sidelined for some reason, this team is already the oldest in modern NBA history. history. But take away Kendrick Nunn and Malik Monk too, and this roster has an average age of 34 years old, which is utterly mind-blowing just to talk about. I mean, just imagine signing up for a YMCA men's league for 30-plus-year-old players, pulling up and seeing all these guys playing against other old men. It's just unfathomable, and some would even say crazy. But the question is, will it work? Recently, we've seen our fair share of veterans play their part in championship runs. We had Kyle Lowry with the 2019 Raptors, guys like playoff Rondo stepped up big for the Lakers in 2020, and Chris Paul took the undefeated bubble Suns to the NBA Finals the next year. But what about this new Lakers team? The difference here is most of the teams that I mentioned only had a few glue guy veteran players that impacted the team. I mean, the Raptors had young talent in Siakam and Van Vliet, not to mention a prime Kawhi Leonard. The Lakers at the time had young players in Kyle Kuzma, Alex Caruso, and more, and the Suns were literally all young talent except for CP3 and Jay Crowder. But this is where the Lakers are different. Sure, they have one star in Anthony Davis who's in his prime at age 28, but the vast majority of this roster are guys over the age of 32, who are most definitely classified as veteran players. But historically, have there been other teams that have had success with an old roster? Looking back, the Lakers already have one of the oldest rosters of all time, but including Talen Horton-Tucker on the roster puts them down at the spot number 5 for the oldest team of all time. Number 1 on the list, you might ask, the 2000-2001 Jazz. And let's just take a look at how this team was able to do. During the 2000 season, it's safe to say, the Jazz team was old. Led by 38-year-old Karl Malone and 39-year-old John Stockton, the Jazz were beginning to see the end of this core, but they wanted to give their old heads one last shot at a chip. During the 2000 offseason, the Jazz acquired a plethora of veteran talent to pursue their win-now ambitions. And going into the regular season, they surrounded their duo with veterans in Byron Russell, John Starks, and Olden Polynice. A majority of this team's core was over the age of 30, and they were looking to do some damage at the end of their 2 Hall of Famers' careers. During this season, the Jazz played pretty well despite their age, and finished with a record of 53-29. And Karl Malone even made a 3rd All-NBA team at age 38, which speaks for itself how good he was during this time. Going into the playoffs, the Jazz had hopes of making a solid conference finals or even finals run, after finishing with the 4th seed in the Western Conference, matching up against the Dallas Mavericks who were the 5th seed. And no, they didn't have a Luka Doncic like they had now, but they had the very young Dirk Nowitzki, who might have just shocked them. Heading into the playoffs, the Jazz believed they would easily beat this Mavericks team. I mean, they had 2 former elite players and all the experience in the world with their roster, so there was no reason for them to lose the young Mavericks, right? Well, after the first couple of games, many believed that this team's confidence was correct, because they took a 2-0 lead against the Mavericks. But after the second game is where things took a turn for the worse, because after this, the Jazz didn't win another game in the whole series, and took a first-round exit in the game. Now, although this series was 20 years ago and many didn't know what caused this team to nearly collapse in the playoffs, many reporters at the time believed it was because of one thing: fatigue. The stars of this Jazz team played relentlessly all season to secure a playoff spot, and they gave it their absolute all in the first 2 games, but then they seemingly ran out of energy and pace, which ultimately led to their downfall. Now, is this the only reason this team lost? Absolutely not, but what it shows is that age isn't just a number, and the oldest team in the 2000s is a testament to that. Looking deeper into the stats, it was surprising the Jazz team even made the playoffs at all, because their pace in which they ran the offense was 21st in the league, which was way below average. Teams were playing faster and harder than these veterans, and they were only able to keep up because of their elite shooting, which was number 1 in the league, and in the end, they still lost. But although the Jazz team didn't work, the Lakers are a different story, because unlike the Jazz, they have a star in Anthony Davis who's in the midst of his prime, 3 great role players who have a chance to take a big leap this season, and even though they do have a lot of veterans, one of them is LeBron James, which at the end of the day makes the rest of this roster irrelevant if he's able to stay healthy. If the Lakers veteran core and Melo, Rondo, and similar players get gas from heavier minutes in the postseason like the Jazz team, LA has fresh 20-year-olds who can replace them and even have the potential to be better than them, which is why I believe we have never seen anything like this 2022 Lakers team. The big thing for this roster is health. They are, well, old, and this can often lead to a monumental amount of injuries. And if any of their big 3 gets hurt, there's a very good chance that LA struggles similar to what happened last year. If the Lakers' master plan of veteran talent, young talent, and a star in their prime works, all I have to say is the NBA better watch out, because the Lakers might have just made an unstoppable formula that only a super team like the Nets could stand a chance against in the postseason. If you enjoyed this different type of video, let me know by leaving a like and subscribing below. And if this video gets a good amount of love, I'll make similar ones to this. Other than that, thank you all so much for watching. I'll catch you all on the next one. Woods out.